Facts about the Titanic. There will never be another like her, says Baker Charles Burgess, who ought to know. In 43 years on the Atlantic run, he has seen them all: Olympic, Majestic, Mauretania, and so on. Today, as carver in the kitchen of the Queen Elizabeth, Burgess is probably the last Titanic crewman on active service. Like the Olympic, yes, but so much more elaborate, he reflects. Take the dining saloon. The Olympic didn't even have a carpet, but the Titanic, you sank in it up to your knees. Then there's the furniture, so heavy you could hardly lift it. And that paneling. They can make them bigger and faster, but it was the care and effort that went into her. She was a beautiful, wonderful ship. Burgess's reflections are typical. The Titanic has cast a spell on all who built and sailed her. So much so that, as the years go by, she grows ever more fabulous. Many survivors now insist she was twice as big as the Olympic. Actually, they were sister ships, with the Titanic just 1,004 tons larger. Others recall golf courses, regulation tennis courts, a herd of dairy cows, and other little touches that exceed even the White Star Line's penchant for luxury. The Titanic was impressive enough without embellishment. Her weight, 46,328 gross tons, 66,000 tons displacement. Her dimensions, 882.5 feet long, 92.5 feet wide, 60.5 feet from waterline to boat deck, or 175 feet from keel to the top of her 4 huge funnels. She was, in short, 11 stories high and 4 city blocks long. Triple screw, the Titanic had 2 sets of 4-cylinder reciprocating engines, each driving a wing propeller, and a turbine driving the center propeller. This combination gave her 50,000 registered horsepower, but she could easily develop at least 55,000 horsepower. At full speed, she could make 24 to 25 knots. Perhaps her most arresting feature was her watertight construction. She had a double bottom and was divided into 16 watertight compartments. These were formed by 15 watertight bulkheads running clear across the ship. Curiously, they didn't extend very far up. The first 2 and the last 5 went only as high as D deck, while the middle 8 were carried up only to E deck. Nevertheless, she could float with any 2 compartments flooded, and since no one could imagine anything worse than a collision at the juncture of 2 compartments, she was labeled unsinkable. The unsinkable Titanic was launched at the Belfast shipyard of Harland and Wolff on May 31st, 1911. The next 10 months were spent in fitting her out. She completed her trials on April 1st, 1912, and arrived in Southampton on April 3rd. A week later, she sailed for New York. Here is a reconstructed log of the main events of her maiden voyage. April 10th, 1912, 12 noon. Leaves Southampton dock, narrowly escapes collision with American liner New York. 7 p.m., stops at Cherbourg for passengers. 9 p.m., leaves Cherbourg for Queenstown. April 11th, 1912, 12:30 p.m., stops at Queenstown for passengers and mail. 1 crewman deserts. 2 p.m., leaves Queenstown for New York, carrying 1,316 passengers and 891 crew. April 14th, 1912, 9 a.m., Coronia reports ice latitude 42 degrees north from longitude 49 degrees to 51 degrees west. 1:42 p.m., Baltic reports ice latitude 40 degrees 51 minutes north, longitude 49 degrees 52 minutes west. 1:45 p.m., America reports ice latitude 41 degrees 27 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 8 minutes west. 7 p.m., temperature 43 degrees. 7:30 p.m., temperature 39 degrees. Also at 7:30 p.m., Californian reports ice latitude 42 degrees 3 minutes north, longitude 49 degrees 9 minutes west. 9 p.m., temperature 33 degrees. 9:30 p.m., Second Officer Lightoller warns carpenter and engine room to watch fresh water supply. It may freeze up. He also warns the crow's nest to watch for ice. 9:40 p.m., Mesaba reports ice latitude 42 degrees north to 41 degrees 25 minutes north, longitude 49 degrees to 50 degrees and 30 minutes west. 10 p.m., temperature 32 degrees. 10:30 p.m., temperature of sea down to 31 degrees. 11 p.m., Californian warns of ice, but cut off before she gives location. 11:40 p.m., Titanic collides with iceberg, latitude 41 degrees 46 minutes north, longitude 50 degrees 14 minutes west. April 15th, 1912. 12:05 a.m. Orders given to uncover the boats, muster the crew, and passengers. 12:15 a.m. First wireless call for help. 12:45 a.m. First rocket fired. Also at 12:45 a.m., first boat, number 7, lowered. 1:40 a.m. Last rocket fired. 2:05 a.m. Last boat, collapsible D, is lowered. 2:10 a.m. Last wireless signal sent. 2:18 a.m. Lights fail. 2:20 a.m. Ship founders. 3:30 a.m. Carpathia's rockets sighted by boats. 4:10 a.m. First boat, number 2, picked up by Carpathia. 8:30 a.m. Last boat, number 12, picked up. 8:50 a.m. Carpathia heads for New York with 705 survivors. So much for the basic facts. Beyond these, much is a mystery. Probably nothing will ever equal the Titanic for the number of unanswered questions she left behind. For instance, how many lives were lost? Some sources say 1,635. The American Inquiry, 1,517. The British Board of Trade, 1,503. The British Enquiry, 1,490. The British Board of Trade figure seems the most convincing, less Fireman J. Coffey, who deserted at Queenstown. How did various people leave the ship? Nearly every woman survivor who was asked replied firmly, "In the last boat." Obviously, all these women didn't go in the same boat, yet to question the point is like questioning a lady's age. One simply doesn't do it. Careful sifting of the testimony at the British and American hearings shows pretty clearly how the ship was abandoned, but even here there's conflicting evidence. At the British Enquiry, each witness was asked how many people were lowered in his lifeboat. The minimum estimates were then added. The results show a good deal of wishful thinking. According to the minimum estimates of survivors, 107 crew were lowered in the boats, but according to actual figures on those saved, 139 crew were lowered in the boats. According to the minimum estimates of survivors, 43 men passengers were lowered in the boats, but according to the actual figures on those saved, 119 men were lowered in the boats. According to the minimum estimates of survivors, 704 women and children were lowered in the boats, but according to the actual figures on those saved, 393 women and children were lowered in the boats. Thus, the total number of people lowered in the boats according to the minimum estimates of survivors was 854 souls, but according to the actual figures on those saved, it was only 651. In short, about 70% more men and 45% fewer women went into the boats than even the most conservative survivors estimated, plus the fact that the boats pulled away with 25% fewer people than estimate. What time did various incidents happen? Everyone agrees that the Titanic hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. and sank at 2:20 a.m., but there's disagreement on nearly everything that happened in between. The times given in this book are the honest estimates of people intimately involved, but they are far from foolproof. There was simply too much pressure. Mrs. Lewis M. Ogden, passenger on the Carpathia, offers a good example. At one point, while helping some survivors get settled, she paused long enough to ask her husband the time. Mr. Ogden's watch had stopped, but he guessed it was 4:30 p.m. Actually, it was only 9:30 in the morning. They were both so engrossed that they had lost all track of time. What did different people say? There are no reconstructed conversations in this book. The words quoted are given exactly as the people remembered them being spoken. Yet there is margin for error. The same conversations are often reported with slight variations. For instance, there are at least 4 versions of the exchange between Captain Rostron and 4th Officer Boxall, as Boat 2 edged alongside the Carpathia. The gist is always the same, but the words vary slightly. What did the band play? The legend is, of course, that the band went down playing Nearer My God to Thee. Many survivors still insist this was so, and there's no reason to doubt their sincerity. Others maintain the band played only ragtime. One man says he clearly remembers the band in its last moments, and they were not playing at all. In this maze of conflicting evidence, junior wireless operator Harold Bride's story somehow stands out. He was a trained observer, meticulously accurate, and on board to the last. He clearly recalled that, as the boat deck dipped under, the band was playing the Episcopal hymn, Autumn. Did a man get off dressed as a woman? While material was being gathered for this book, 4 first-class passengers were specifically named as the famous man who escaped in women's clothes. There is not one shred of evidence that any of these men were guilty, and considerable evidence to the contrary. For instance, investigation suggests that one was the target of a vindictive reporter shoved aside while trying for an interview. Another, prominent in local politics, was the victim of opposition mudslinging. Another was the victim of society gossip. He did happen to leave the Titanic before his wife. In the search for bigger game, no one bothered about third-class passenger Daniel Buckley, who freely acknowledged that he wore a woman's shawl over his head. He was only a poor, frightened Irish lad, and nobody was interested. The answer to all these Titanic riddles will never be known for certain. The best that can be done is to weigh the evidence carefully and give an honest opinion. Some will still disagree, and they may be right. It is a rash man indeed who would set himself up as final arbiter on all that happened the incredible night the Titanic went down.